So if you have not heard of Grada before, we are a mission and vision-driven organization. Our vision is a Colorado where all children, regardless of where they live, how they learn, or the color of their skin, graduate prepared to lead their best lives. And in order to do that, we try to harness the power of grassroots activism and diverse, inclusive coalitions so we can stimulate the adequate and equitable investment in all Colorado public schools, students, and teachers. So we have got a great agenda for you today. First, we're going to break out into some breakout rooms. We really want to hear from you. We want to know, what do you want in your public schools? And this year, we want to bring as many voices to the school funding table together as possible so that when we work toward that vision of a Colorado where every student is ready to lead their best lives when they graduate, we need community input, and that means you. Then we will go over some common school finance language. There's a lot of terms that are thrown around and talked about often, but they're explained rarely. And we really want you to be informed about public school funding terms and resources. Then we'll dive into that 2021 legislative landscape, let you know what Grada is doing and how you can get involved in that. And throughout this event, please put all of your questions in the chat at the end. We'll try to answer as many as we can. And then Zach will put our agenda in the chat so you can follow along with us along the way. And then I'm gonna briefly kick it over to our newest team member, Cody. Cody, do you wanna say hello?
Hi, folks. My name is Cody, and I'm really excited to be joining the Great Ed team officially next week as the new director of organizing, and really excited to join the team. I was a middle school teacher in Denver Public Schools and have been working in community engagement, and just really excited. Great Ed was actually an organization that helped me find my voice and be more of an advocate when it comes to adequate and equitable school finance when I was in the classroom. And so just really excited that my journey has led me here to be able to work on the team and help to do some organizing work with all of you. And so just wanted to have an opportunity to introduce myself and say hello. And I look forward to working with all of you.
Great. Thanks, Cody. Now we're going to split up into some breakout rooms, and we really want to get an idea of what you want to learn about, what you want to hear about, and what you care about most in your public schools. We really want to listen and hear you. The two questions that we'll put in the chat are, what is your favorite thing about your public school? And what does your dream school have that your current school lacks? I mean, when we go into these breakout rooms, just a good rule of thumb is to make space and take space. If you're the kind of person who in sharing spaces tends to share a lot, try to make space for others. And if you're the kind of person who tends to sit back and not say much, try to take a little bit more space because we would love to hear from you. So with that, I'm going to throw us all into breakout rooms for 10 minutes, and I'll let you know when we have 2 minutes left. Well, welcome back, everyone. We are now going to transition into that next part of our agenda, talking about the common school finance language. So Lisa and Ben, I'll kick it off to you two.
All right, so the first item on this list is called the budget stabilization factor. If you are on this call and have paid attention to education, or any time in, well, over the past decade, you've probably heard of the budget stabilization factor or the negative factor or the BS factor. And basically in 2007, as the Great Recession hit, the state wasn't generating nearly as much revenue as it was previously, and neither were localities. And what this meant was that there were fewer dollars for public schools. And so the budget stabilization factor was installed. And what that is it's a mechanism that's used to reduce state funding to districts, again, created in response to the Great Recession. And Right now, the budget stabilization factor is at 1.17 billion, I believe. Is that correct, Lisa?
I believe Senator Zenzinger has what it's bigger or smaller than that. She's saying it's smaller, and maybe Senator Zenzinger, who is the chair of the Senate Education Committee and was on the JBC. You know so much about this stuff. We will make sure that everybody walks away with good information. Go ahead, Ben.
So another way to look at it, though, is that it's a measure of how far behind inflation per pupil funding is since the Great Recession. And we'll get a little bit more into this later when we talk about the School Finance Act. But I'll turn it over to Lisa real quick for mill levies.
Thanks, Ben. And as folks know on this call, these are very complicated issues. We just wanted to sort of get some baseline language down. And it's, as Nicole said, a continuing conversation. We're very honored to have a number of legislators. I haven't seen the list recently, but I know there are a number of current and former legislators. We're very honored to have you here. So the next one is mill levy, which is a phrase that's everywhere. And just to take it to its really simple basics, it's the tax rate that's applied to the assessed value, another big phrase there, of property, whether it's residential or commercial property. 1 mil equals $1 per $1,000 of assessed value. What is assessed value? We are not taxed on 100% of the value of our homes. As a matter of fact, because of the Gallagher Amendment, we're taxed at about less than 7% or 7.1% of our homes right now. So maybe just your bathroom or your kitchen area. And so all it means is, what a mill means is that you take the percentage, that percentage times the value of your home, and $1, each mill is $1 for every $1,000 of that assessed value. The legislature, the state determines how many mills are applied toward the School Finance Act, toward what the legislature decides is how much each district gets. And then they fill in with the rest with general fund to get to the point that the formula tells them they need to fund each district. After that, there is a mill levy override you may have heard of that some districts can do and some districts don't have the resource, the tax base to do. But a mill levy override is a mill on top of what the state has decided the district gets from the combination of local and state. It gets a lot more complicated than that, but that's the basics, and we hope to continue this conversation. The other thing that we wanted to put in here, because privatization comes up in most legislative sessions, we just wanted to sort of get that idea out there. What is privatization? Privatization in its most general form is using public tax dollars to fund private education. Great Education Colorado advocates for public dollars staying in public schools. It can be called vouchers. It can be called tax credits. It can be direct payments to a school, to a private school, or direct payments to a parent to take to a private school. But that is something that comes in lots of different forms, and it's something that we always keep an eye out for as legislative sessions come up.
Alrighty, and this is, for Great Ed's purposes, really sort of the most important point here, equity in education and what that means. So we hear a lot about equity versus equality, and the key difference there is, you know, pretend you have a group of students who belong to different households of different incomes, who come from varying geographies, who are of different abilities. And you want to make it so that each one of those students has a chance to succeed to the best of their ability, whatever the metrics measuring them are. If you give each one of those students, say you invest in the same amount of money in each one of those students, that's an equal investment. But all it does is preserve the fact that some of those students, say, maybe don't have as much money at home or aren't as able to learn certain things. So it cements those those inequalities. Equity is really about giving kids the resources that they need, well, based on their needs, so that they have the advantage necessary to achieve to their highest ability. And here we have a graphic. On the left, you have equality, and on the right, you have equity. And so notice first thing, the ground on both of them. So the ground is the same. So there you can see that if you took away those boxes on the left, they're all sitting on the same ground. So they have unequal footing. The person in yellow can't, dream of seeing over the fence, still with the box. So that's what an equal input looks like right there, is giving each one of those students the same amount of resources and the same resources. And then you can see that, where the red person was barely peeking over the fence before, they're barely peeking over the fence. The blue person has a good vantage point. The yellow person can't see at all. But then we have equity on the other side, which is where the yellow person now has 3 boxes under them. So their needs have been serviced, and so has red. And then the blue, the person who is already highest up, is still where they are. And so basically equity, it takes into account a lot more variables and addresses those variables in figuring out what kind of policy we need to make sure that our kids succeed.
I'm going to take over here for a minute, and I just I appreciate in my small group, or in the breakout room, there was a lot of talk about diversity and equity, and so it's really wonderful to see that these issues are becoming top of mind for so many people. We're going to start this legislative landscape with something that most of you have seen for quite a long time. Can you go to the next slide, Ben? This is the following red line graph that we have updated. We've been updating this for about 15 years, and the red line is how Colorado compares to that line near the top. That would be the national average. And so, of course, always the context for our discussion about school funding is that Colorado has been falling farther and farther behind the national national norm, behind our neighborhood, our neighbors to the north and the east, and so that's the big context of what we're looking at. And of course, as we've already discussed, we've also not just falling behind our nationally, but behind ourselves. We are 1.17 billion, as Senator Zenzinger just confirmed, 1.17 billion behind, just keeping up with inflation from 2009. Of course, a lot of things happened recently that have changed the landscape as well. So back to Ben.
All righty. So to talk about what's going to happen legislatively this year, or what we think is going to happen legislatively this year, we need to set a context first. And part of that is with some referred measures that passed in 2020. So the first one is Prop 116. This was a pretty big ticket item. If you had a ballot and you voted last year, you probably voted one way or another on this. So basically what it is it's an across the board tax cut. And so that means that all taxpayers receive that cut. But if you think about what that means for people who have a lot of money versus people who don't have that much money, it means those people with a lot of money are saving in raw dollar amount a lot more than, say, somebody who makes $45 or $50 or $60,000 a year. Can somebody mute? Oh, got it. So the wealthiest among us benefit most from the tax break, and the average Coloradan saves about 77 cents per week. That's $40 a year. My SUV costs more than that to fill up when I go to the gas station. So this is leading to loss of revenue with education, so it's something that we have to keep an eye on. Proposition EE, maybe the other biggest item on the ballot. So this was a new tobacco and vaping tax to generate revenue for a few different things. So early childhood education, rural, and then also some tobacco education / cessation programs. So it's a step in the right direction. We are going to get some more funding for schools, but the problem is that funding ends in 2023. And after that, early childhood education will see increased input. And of course, we support that, but we also would like to see greater investment in K-12 with a measure like this. And it doesn't tackle the funding crisis because it doesn't solve the root issue. It doesn't give us a reliable, steady source of revenue for our schools. And then Amendment B. If you all have heard of the Gallagher Amendment before, Lisa mentioned it a few minutes ago. This repeals some crucial parts of the Gallagher Amendment. And to not get into too much detail, basically what this does is it prevents further automatic cuts from happening at the local level. So it stops us from digging a hole, but it doesn't raise any revenue. So we're not really getting at that root issue of a sustainable stream of revenue. Although when property values rise, we will see some sort of increase in revenue.
Okay, so just a little bit of visualization about the School Finance Act that the legislature is walking into. This is a measure of the total budget stabilization factor. And we do want to thank, I think it might be Senator Zenzinger, who is responsible for changing it from the negative factor to the budget stabilization factor so that we could, no, wasn't you. So we can refer to it as the BS factor.
No, it was Kevin Priola.
It was Senator Priola. So as you can see, 2008, 2009 is when it was before, that's when the recession hit. 2009, it was the first year that it was applied. It got the worst. I just want you to notice that it got the worst about 4 years after the recession, and that's because the stimulus dollars disappeared. And so when the federal support was gone, the state had to figure out how to fund it, and one way, and it couldn't. And so that's when it got worse. And you can see that over time, it was being whittled down until COVID hit. And that is what happened to the negative factor, almost doubled. And the next way you can look at it, the next slide just shows what that looks like in per pupil funding. We are at $1,310. We currently, the state funding level is $1,300 below keeping up with inflation from before the recession. That is as high as it has ever been. So that's the context. Now, the next slide is about the federal funding that's coming, and there are folks on this call who are much more involved and knowledgeable about this, but the big picture is there are absolutely funds that have come into the state that are helping our schools. Remember, though, that their schools were already underfunded, and then COVID comes and it increased costs significantly. Districts are basically keeping two separate types of instruction going at once. They're doing the hybrid, they're doing it in person, they're trying to keep kids separated. So these CARES Act dollars, which was the one back in, I think, April, and the ESSER Act was more recent, for the most part, those dollars have to be spent on COVID related items. Not just the general operating of schools. And they are paying for new costs above the budgets that the districts were already dealing with when they were not able to meet all their needs and pay their teachers they wanted to. And I expect that during this legislative session, there'll be a lot of talk of, well, there's all that federal funding, the schools are taken care of. They are not. The federal funding, thank goodness for the federal funding, but they are not taking care of our kids, especially with the increased needs. I haven't even mentioned mental health, for instance. And we have to consider, and that the worst funding years, as I pointed out in the last slide, the worst funding years are about 4 years out after this funding is gone. We can't let ourselves have a huge hole and then, have to deal with it later. Ben?
All right, the School Finance Act. This is sort of more broad than the School Finance Act. But so to the BS factor that we just mentioned, we're sort of walking into a new year right now with it at $1.17 billion, although part of that is sort of hidden by federal dollars right now. It's the $13.10 per pupil. And we also have the fact that enrollment has dropped this year because of COVID. And so we need to make sure that the Joint Budget Committee, which is the committee in charge of the purse strings, essentially, doesn't claw back the funds that were guaranteed or that were promised to schools in 2020. So for 2020, 2021. And so we've done some work around that, and we'll mention that a little bit in a few slides. We also have the fact that the governor's budget is trying to reduce the BS factor to 2019-2020 levels in the coming year, so to $572 million. We obviously support any reduction to the budget stabilization factor, and we have advocated for reductions in the budget stabilization factor in the past. Other funding issues. As mentioned earlier, we do expect that privatization proposals will be introduced. As an organization, we stand against unfunded mandates, and we have in the past. And then mill levy equalization, which Lisa mentioned earlier. Lisa, do you want to add anything here?
I will. I'm going to talk a little bit about that mill levy equalization issue, but I want to pull out from the chat some very good news. As Ben mentioned, we and our partners with the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition sent a letter and a petition signed by 1,100 people from all over the state about not clawing back any of that money and making sure that the districts get to keep it. And Senator Zenzinger reports that they will maintain or increase funding. So they're not clawing back, and they may even increase funding this year. This is in the current school year that is going on right now. So that is fantastic. Fantastic news. And I'm going to let, just to make sure we keep going, please look at Senator Zenzinger's comments in the chat. That gets a little more clear on the clarification. Mill levies, I mentioned what a mill is. The legislature may address the issue of mill levy equalization this year. They started that with preliminary action last year, and now they have to revisit it again. This could be a topic for an entire hour or two. So I'm just going to make it sort of just give you the big picture, which is that lawmakers are trying to reverse inequities that were created because the Colorado Department of Education misinterpreted the School Finance Act of 1994 for 13 years. And what they did was 174 out of 178 districts in this state debruced. They said, we understand that if our property taxes come in at revenue levels that are above our district's Tabor limit, keep the money, spend the money. But then the Colorado Department of Education misread the School Finance Act of 1994 and actually rebruced, for all practical purposes, those districts. So think about which districts would their property revenues would increase the fastest, and so their mill levies would be cut because of Tabor, because of this misread. And so that led to this next slide, which shows that if you have a $248,000 home in Fort Morgan, you pay $533, or if you're in Pueblo, they're at 27 mills because their mill rate didn't get cut because their property values weren't exploding. Jeffco's at 523. Aspen, a $250,000 house, if anybody could possibly find one, a $250,000 house pays $87. On that value. And so that's what the legislature is trying to deal with. You can go to the next slide, Ben. It's pretty complicated. As it happens, if it goes on, we will get back to you. That's fine. It's complicated. It's unclear right now. We'll be talking about this if it comes to fruition, and there are a lot of folks on this call who are going to have to deal with that. So moving on to what Grada is doing.
Good way to leave it, Lisa. Thank you. I see Senator Zenzinger smiling. So what is Great Ed doing right now? So one of our big projects is to essentially give legislators an understanding of the history, the evolving context, and the current realities of school finance in Colorado. A lot of people who aren't on ed committee or who aren't interested in it, they hear what they hear from lobbyists in relation to certain bills, and just pretend that you were being persuaded in school by somebody who wanted you to learn history some way. You wouldn't get the whole picture. So what we're doing is trying to step back and provide a platform and a basis for legislators to learn, listen, and then move forward better equipped to make informed decisions relating to school finance. So we've also been connecting people with their legislators for a long time, but we just did it and we're going to continue doing it. So we did send out that petition, which I'm going to show briefly. Can everybody see that? Gotcha. Awesome. So this was the petition that we sent out 2 or 3 times over the past month. It's titled, "Tell the Legislature Now Would Be the Worst Time to Cut School Funding." And this was talking about that the 2021 school year appropriation and how we're trying to get the JBC, the Joint Budget Committee, not to claw back any of that money in the original appropriation. And we got some good news, obviously. So we're also continuing our long-term work with the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition. In the past, the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition authored and ran Amendment 73. We had a lot of involvement in Initiative 271. And right now we're really focused on building good relationships, sustainable relationships outside of education. Partly as an acknowledgement that these education policies affect everyone, and also that everyone benefits or stands to benefit from good education policy. And it's also from the realization that, passing a comprehensive ballot initiative to secure a sustainable source of funding is going to take more than just us. It's going to take other people who have a vested interest in this as well. And we're having some good conversations so far.
Great, thanks, Ben and Lisa. So now how can you get involved? I'm sure a lot of you are, but please get on our email list. That successful petition that we delivered, that was sent out in that email list. And Zach will put all the links in the chat there for you. So please make sure you're on that. You can also sign up for a presentation from us. Do you want to hear more about Gallagher, Amendment B, other things happening in the legislature, school funding, education equity? Sign up for a presentation. We would love to first listen to you and hear about your public schools, and then also give you just a little bit more information. Also, we have a really awesome tool. We recently redid our website. It's totally revamped. If you haven't visited it recently, please check it out. And we have an awesome escape room tool on there. It's called Bridge the Gap. You can learn about all different topics in education in Colorado. We've got different rooms for you to escape from, like the teaching room, and I won't spoil anything else, but absolutely check it out. Follow us on social media as well. And one thing you can do right now too is fill out this poll. Let us know, what are your top 3 funding topics that would be of most interest to you? I know I saw a few in the chat. Folks were mentioning Tabor. A question that we get asked, probably the most frequent question out of anything else, is, what about the marijuana money? Do you care about that? Do you want to hear more about that? We would love to know. I will close the poll in about 30 seconds.
And if there are other topics, please put them in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, if we're missing anything on here, which, you know, we can't encompass school funding in 10 categories, please put them in there. We would love to know, what are we missing? What else should we focus on this year? All right, I'll give folks 5 seconds. 3, 2, and 1. All right, can you see the results? For some reason on my end, I cannot see the results. So Lisa, do you want to mention the couple of top ones on there?
Yes, but I just unmuted myself and made it disappear. Ben? I know it did.
I unmuted myself and it did not disappear. Okay. So in first place with 84% of respondents reporting is equitable funding of schools. Second place, we have a tie for second place actually, COVID impacts on schools and funding, and then Tabor.
Okay.
And then in third, and it's a distant third, is testing.
All right, that's really good input. Thank you all for sharing, and also thank you all for sharing in your small groups. One of our big things this year is really just listening to all communities in Colorado to know where can we help most and how can we help you help your communities. And now I'm going to kick it over to Annalise because we have an exciting opportunity for you.
Hey, everybody. Actually, in an effort to really stay aligned with our commitment to equity and also providing resources that are created or support and or uplift minoritized voices in the education system. There's an opportunity to participate, well, for you to win registration to a literacy activism workshop, which is hosted by the American Library Association and is led actually by Janet Damon, who is from Colorado and has served as a library services specialist for Denver Public Schools and also runs her own organization called Afros and Books. She has more than 20 years of experience as a librarian and educator in urban school settings. And this particular workshop is covering different ways to engage with cultural organizers, citizen artists, and cultural producers to bridge literacy, culture, art, and community at your library and schools. And so in order to win one of 3 registrations, 3 easy steps. You know what? Just help us out. Follow us on social media, okay? All you have to do is when you see me post, well, it'll be me. I'm doing the posting. When you see the post, you'll see Janet's face. I actually have her doing a little video. When you see that post, share it. You can share it on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. Tag 3 folks who are either here on this call now, or actually it'd be awesome to get folks who maybe have no clue about Great Ed. So tag 3 friends. Maybe there's an educator or librarian who you think might benefit from this as well. And then share the post and tag us so that way I can keep track and follow up with you when we choose the winner this Friday. So pretty easy steps. The workshop is next month in February. And so you have plenty of time to get everything organized and take off 90 minutes on a Thursday. So just make sure you're following us on our social media platforms, and we'll have one winner from each of the platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And yes, you're right. You know what? I ended up changing the visual, but it is Great Ed, and I will type it in the chat. So thank you for that. Yes, our ID handle is Great Ed Colorado, and I will put that in now.
Thank you, Annalise. I do think we have some time for questions. The one question/comment that I saw in the chat, Lisa, maybe could you take on this one? It's from Jerry Pinsker, and they ask, can you talk about Tabor making all this worse, especially in future years?
Y'all got an hour? Yeah, Tabor is just sort of the background structure that we keep running up against. If we have a great couple of years, and we catch up to our Tabor limit. Thankfully, back in 2005, we changed Tabor. It's one of the few, we actually didn't change Tabor, but the interpretation so that we don't fall. Every time our revenues fall, we don't go to the lowest peak and the lowest valley and have to cut. That doesn't, our Tabor limit doesn't go that far down. But if we have a really good recovery, a strong recovery, we could be in a Tabor surplus place again. And so we would be giving money back when we still have a huge negative factor. Tabor is underlying all of these things. Gallagher wouldn't have done as much damage if Tabor hadn't come along and made it impossible for school boards to just float their mills when the Gallagher amendment pushed the assessment rate down. Tabor is the reason that the School Finance Act was misinterpreted back in 1994 and created these incredible inequities. And Tabor is the reason that we can't fix it in any sort of direct way, because you can't have a statewide vote on local mill levies. I mean, it is complicated everything. We've been doing a lot of workarounds and will continue to, but we will continue to keep people connected to the movement to adapt, change, fix Tabor so that we can fund not just education, but all the way through higher education and public health and everything else. I do want to recognize that we've got some great experts on the call and a number of legislators. I saw Representative Titone, I saw Representative Kipp, Senator Story, Senator Zenzinger. If I missed anybody, I do want to give you an opportunity to either answer some of the questions that you've heard or, give some more insight into the coming session. And I do want to make sure that as there are other questions that we
I don't Lisa, you cut out a little bit. Could you repeat that last couple of sentences?
I was just saying that we had a number of experts and legislators on, and so would love to have them give input too on some of these questions. But I want to make sure that everybody gets to get their questions in too. But our legislators do have a lot to report.
Another question from Jonna in the chat, Jonna Levine. She said, could you also review the limitations of ESSER 1 and 2 one-time dollars, when they need to be spent by, etc.?
I will say a little bit about this, but there may be a legislator on the phone or somebody else who knows more. Out of the big picture, the first dollars needed to be spent by the end of 2020, I believe. Although it may have been extended now, but it really is very COVID related. The newest, and I would direct you to I'm looking at the Colorado School Finance Project, has some great information, cosfp.org, if somebody can put that in the chat. They have a whole page on this, Colorado COVID relief dollars. There's Safe School Reopening Grants. The state legislature did some funding of that. The ESSER, I just made it go away. The ESSER money is coming through Title I, which means that it will be a little bit more directed toward schools with higher at-risk kids in poverty, which is helpful. And I think that has through the end of this calendar year. Does anybody else have better information or just another take on that to provide more detail?
You're correct, Lisa. And in addition, though, the ESSER dollars are a little bit more flexible. They do not have to be tied to COVID-related expenses like the CARES Act, but they do have to be spent by the end of the next budget year.
Okay.
We do have another question in the chat. I think it's more so directed toward legislators. So feel free to pipe in if you'd like to. From Mike DeGuire, he asks, will the legislators move to support no standardized testing this spring for K-12 students and to support no required SAT or ACT testing for admission to state colleges?
So I don't believe Representative Sirota is on the call, but she does have a bill starting in the House that would ask the legislature if we could direct CDE to suspend state testing, to seek a waiver to suspend state testing for this year due to the pandemic. And then I'll be carrying that bill in the Senate. I am really excited that we have a bipartisan sponsorship of that bill. Senator Don Quorum has agreed to sponsor that bill in the Senate, which I think is really good that we have bipartisan support for that. And then I believe Tammy Story could talk about, and Kathy Kipp could talk about the next one.
Hey, everybody. Rep Kipp, I think I saw you on the call. Maybe you'd like to pop up with about the test optional bill we're doing for higher ed. Is she there? I can't see everybody because the screen still has questions on it, so my view's a little bit limited. Is Rep Kipp still on the line? Okay, well, I'll get started. Maybe she'll pop in a second. So I'm running a bill with Representative Kipp. She's starting it in the House, and I'll be sponsoring it in the Senate. And it's to extend what is currently in statute right now for this year, to make tests, the national testing, optional for the admissions process for graduates who graduate this year in 2021. That was primarily because we were trying to provide some relief since testing locations and test dates were closed down due to COVID back in the summer and the spring and the fall. And so they didn't have access to that testing. But we wanted to make it permanent, because there's lots of call for that as well. The institutions of higher ed are fully on board with going test optional, where they can ask for test scores if they wish, but all the ones that we've been talking to are totally on board with not requiring it anymore. That GPA is a better predictor of persistence and success in college than the national test scores are. And it gives them an opportunity to look more holistically at students as they apply. And it also will help improve diversity, we believe, in our institutions, which is one of the top goals for our institutions of higher ed as well. So students of color, first generation students, Pell Grant students, women, many of them are the significant pools of populations that would not submit test scores. And so giving them this opportunity to be able to finish the application process and move forward with that and have an opportunity to go attend an institution of higher ed is a good thing. So that's why we're doing it.
Thank you so much, Senator. I'm so grateful to have legislators on this call. Great Ed has not generally taken stands specifically on some of these issues. So we're always looking at the funding issue, and there are funding components of it. I wanted to also, I think there was a question earlier about teacher shortage, and I'm guessing that there are some people on here who can add to what I say here. I have seen national studies that say that 27% of teachers are considering leaving the profession after this year because COVID may be the last 10 straws. I mean, I think there were a lot of things that have been pushing people out of the teaching profession. Here in Colorado, we literally have the largest gap in the nation between what teachers are paid and what they could make in other professions for which they are qualified. And so the teacher shortage that's being felt everywhere, I think, is going to be more intense here in Colorado. I know we have folks on this call who are doing remarkable work, friends at PEBC who do the residency model, and but attracting and retaining teachers has been a big problem for Colorado for quite some time. I fear that COVID is really going to make it much worse. Money alone won't solve this problem, but we are not going to solve this problem without some new funding. So I would love to have, it looks like we're going to have to close because we're at time, but I'll give anybody, if there's any legislator or anybody else who wants to make a comment about what's going on with the teacher shortage and what you see coming down the pike. And there are our names to, if you have further questions, but if just give you I'll give 10 or a couple seconds to see if anybody else wants to chime in, and then I'm going to let Nicole finish it up. We have from, thank you, Laquita. She mentioned that she's been told new teachers are choosing to be tutors and they make more money doing that than staying in the public system.
So Lisa, I'm collaborating with Sue, Sava, and PEBC and working on the education system resiliency initiative. There's another I can't remember what the next I is, but ESRI, taking into consideration the recommendations of that project and implementing 2 or 3 of them this year to address the educator shortage. And it's going to be around increasing mental health supports for educators, increasing teacher autonomy, and then also working on increasing the educators in the pipeline. So really excited to have their scholarship and their partnership on this bill.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming, for participating in the small breakout rooms, just for being an advocate and really wanting to get more involved, especially in this 2021 legislative session. We will definitely have some more actions to be taken coming up. So please sign up for our email list, check out our website to check out our escape room, and we will see you all soon. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.